The central point on which all visions of a third stage of the web, aka Web3, pivots is decentralization. So what is decentralization of the web? Here's a simplified explanation. To make a service like a simple website enabling real-time chat available to people through the web, that service must live somewhere. On today's web, that somewhere is typically a web host or a cloud host. This host becomes the single source of truth for the website and the chat app, and everyone interacts with it through that host. This is centralization of services. The service is located in a central location. Centralization is easy and effective because we're dealing with a single source of truth. It's also problematic because it makes the service reliant on a single point of failure and because centralized control over data is valuable. On the centralized web, if the centralized host goes down, the service goes down as well. On the centralized web, large centralized platforms like social media own and control the content and interactions happening on those services. And that means they can apply content moderation, refuse service, even block access based on factors like where you're located or your previous history of interaction. Decentralization aims to solve these issues and more by distributing data between all users of the platform. There are many ways of doing this. Here are two examples: federated decentralization and absolute decentralization. In a federated system, multiple different autonomous and independent data sources, typically databases, are mapped together to operate as one cohesive unit. So for example, instead of your posts on a social media site sitting on a centralized host, they may sit on any hosted service you choose and then be federated or combined with other posts from other services to appear as one cohesive whole. The data doesn't live in one central location, and each individual user has control over their own data and where it's hosted. This model is fast and doesn't require a lot of power, but it's also brittle in that data lost on one node may be lost to everyone. In an absolute decentralized system, full copies of the data are distributed to all participants. So when a new participant wants access to the data, they can pull it from whichever source is closest to them. This model can be fast and requires a lot of computing power because every update has to be distributed to every node. In return, we get persistent data. Losing one node doesn't matter because copies of the whole dataset exists everywhere. In both these models, federated and absolute decentralized, no centralized authority owns the data and controls access. Instead, everyone owns the data and each user can control who accesses their data. At least that's the goal. When you hear people talk about decentralization and taking power back from big corporations and platforms and banks, this is what they're talking about. Remove the middleman, the central source of truth. While classic Web 3.0 projects tended towards the federated decentralization model, blockchain-based Web 3 decentralization focuses almost exclusively on the absolute decentralization model because that's how the blockchain itself works.